what is cracking? It is your girl, Lillian Francis. Today we are talking about a very important mixing subject, and this is masking. Masking is what happens when we have two instruments or sounds with similar frequencies and they kind of cover each other up, and it makes it hard to hear each sound clearly defined. This is a really important step in mixing because mixing is all about giving every single sound its own unique space in the stereo field, and when things are masking each other, that makes it difficult. One thing I will say is not everything needs to be separated. Some sounds should sound like they blend together. For example, an orchestra, you don't have to EQ every single violin in an orchestra differently if you want all the violins to sound like one big giant pad of violins. But this is important for the sounds you want to sound separate and defined. So we often think of EQ when we think of masking, but there are a lot of steps that we can take before we get to EQ to separate our sounds and avoid masking. The first step to avoid masking is to make sure there's no masking in the first place. So this depends on what sounds you decide to use in your track, right? So you might have a guitar and a piano both happening at the same time. And if they're in the same frequency range, maybe you decide to transpose the piano an octave up, or maybe the guitar goes an octave down, or the guitar an octave up, or the keys an octave down. Or maybe if you have a really low boomy sub bass, you decide to let the kick take kind of a higher frequency range, maybe between 100 and 130, instead of having it be down around 60 or 50. So as you are bringing new sounds into your project, I want you to be thinking, what else is happening here? And is there a space sonically, frequency-wise, where I can put my sound where it can live harmoniously with everything else? Number 2 is panning. Panning's amazing. We have this gorgeous 180-degree spread that we can pan our sounds around to. There's no reason to have two sounds that are in the same frequency range right next to each other. We can spread them out, and then it's easier for your brain to tell that's a this sound and that's a this sound, and those are different sounds. The next thing you can do is called sidechain compression, and this is all about lowering the volume of one sound at a certain point in time to let the other sound kind of shine or cut through. You've probably heard of sidechain compression when it comes to talking about kick and bass. So let's get inside a project and look at an example of that. Time to dive right in. Splash! All right, fam, welcome to my project. This is one that is coming out in July. It's called Touching You. I'm very excited for this song. We're going to use it as our example today. So first off, let's talk about what a compressor does. A compressor, when it gets an input signal that's louder than the threshold that we set, it tells our track to reduce the volume of that sound by a certain ratio. What sidechain compression does is it is a compressor, and instead of the compressor listening to the track that it's on for the input signal, it's gonna listen to a different track. And when a different track goes over a certain volume threshold, it's telling the track that the compressor is on, now duck the volume of that track. So how is this useful? This is super useful when it comes to kick and bass, for example. So kick and bass live in the same range from about 0 to 200, and we want to make sure that the kick can be heard and the bass can be heard. One way to do that is with EQ. Another way to do that is with sidechain compression and letting one simply be the loudest, biggest one at one part and then back off when the other one wants to shine. So let's look at that in action. Here we have my bass, and the bass sound like this. And you can hear that it has this pumping effect, and that's because it is being sidechained to the kick. So in our compressor in Ableton, you just open up the compressor, engage the sidechain, and then you can choose audio from where. And then once you have selected where you want to get your audio input from, then you can adjust the threshold to determine how much gain reduction you're going to get. So this compressor is helping the kick hold its own every time it hits and not compete too much with the bass, because the bass is like, all right, I'll back down. I use sidechain compression on a lot of different things. In fact, I actually have some sidechain compression happening with my vocals, where I grouped all of my instruments that are not vocals, and I grouped all of my vocals. And then I have a compressor on not Vox, getting audio from vocals. So when the vocals come in, we have slight reduction in the volume of our vocals. And it helps keep my vocals on top and make sure that my vocal is always going to be loudest and not competing with the instruments, because my vocal is the most important part of this track.
Roses are yet to plant in the blossoms I'll never smell.
And And that's a very subtle one, but mixing is all about a ton of subtle little things that add up and create a crispy, delicious final mix. All right, now let's talk about EQ. EQ should be used once you have already tried to avoid masking, and definitely use panning, and maybe also use sidechain compression. So what EQ does is it allows us to turn up and down certain frequencies. So by turning up and down certain frequencies, we can carve out little pockets for every sound to live. Let's go ahead and look into my guitar. So I have a main guitar, which just loops throughout the entire song. And I don't care if these are masking each other, they're in the exact same frequency. I'm not gonna bother to try to separate these because I want them to act all as one, as this beautiful kind of guitar pad that is spanning the width of my track. However, there is a second guitar here that is adding like a little riff situation on top. And I do want to be able to identify these differently and kind of separate them in the mix. So I'm going to use EQ for that. Now, like I said, each sound is going to get its own special place where it likes to shine in the mix. And we have to identify where that is. So let's go ahead and grab an EQ. I use FabFilter. I love this EQ. It's super functional and it sounds great. And it's got lots of fun features. I'm also going to put on my headphones at this part because when I'm dealing with like getting really listeny with frequencies, I like to have them right up in my ear holes. Plus I just look fucking cute in headphones. So EQ is all about emphasizing what sounds good and cutting out what sounds bad. So I think of it as like emphasizing the frequencies that spark joy and then cutting the ones that don't. And for every sound, you're going to have frequencies that like sound good. They sound like the instrument, right? It's like what I call the home zone, which is where the instrument shines, where it has its, I don't know, that the quality that you want to bring forward in the sound. And every sound's going to have frequencies that don't really add much to the sound. So the two main ways that we use EQ are one, to make the sound as good as possible by itself, and two, to make the sound as good as possible with every other sound in the track. So the first one, getting into sound as good as possible by itself, is more of a sound design thing. So when it comes to sound design, do whatever the fuck you want. You can boost, cut, whatever. You're getting it to sound the way you want it to sound. But then you have to get it to fit with everything else. And that's a matter of carving out space for everything in our track to live. And when we're doing this kind of EQ, it is suggested that you cut rather than boost. If you think about it, when you're boosting a sound, that's fine, but it might cause masking problems for other sounds because you're just raising more frequencies that could be competing with something else, right? Versus cutting, where you are just letting other instruments kind of fill in that space. And that being said, you can totally boost frequencies even when you're trying to get them to fit together with other sounds. I would just suggest to focus more on cutting than on boosting. And we might even do some boosting here today. I don't know. So what I'm gonna do is on each track, I'm gonna find what frequencies spark the most joy. What is the home zone? Where does this sound want to really come forth and express itself? And then once we find the home zone for each guitar, we are going to cut it out of the other guitar. All right, so main guitar, first thing I'm gonna do is just cut out the low lows because we don't need them. So here I just cut until I could hear a noticeable difference, and then I just pulled it back a little bit. Next, I'm going to use this headphone icon. EQ8 has this as well. I'm gonna use this headphone icon to just scan back and forth and find that home zone. All right, 800 is where I'm hearing it express its authentic self. Okay, so I want to give these guitars 800. That's going to be their place to shine. So I'm just going to take note of 800 and we're going to go on to guitar 2, and I'm going to do the same thing with guitar 2. Ooh, okay, that has some really nice character and personality at around 1700. So we're gonna let it live there. But what we're gonna do is we are going to give this guitar, our main guitar, the gift of 800. So we're just gonna pull down right around 800 to kind of clear up that area. Let's hear how that sounds. Cool, not a huge difference. It sounds nice. Let's go ahead and do the same but opposite thing for this guitar. And we are going to pull out right around 1800, 1700 area. So I ended up doing a little bit of boost around 800 for this one, just because when I cut this, it just felt like it needed a little something to kind of fill in that area. So I'm liking the way this is sounding now, and I might go ahead just kind of to even it out. I might go ahead and give a little boost around 2K 1800 to guitar 2 and see how that sounds. Nice. Okay, sweet. So we have created complementary EQ curves where we are letting main guitar shine around 800 and then guitar 2 shine around 1800. So let's go ahead and see how they sound together. And I want to turn on and off the EQs so we can hear what difference is being made. I'm going to hit my key up here. I'm going to hit my on-off button for my fab filter, and then I'm going to map each of them. So now with the touch of one button, I can turn them on and off at the same time. All right, let's hear if this did anything. Did you hear that? It's subtle. Everything in mixing is subtle. But it's about making tiny little decisions that all stack up and make your song shine. But I can definitely tell the difference. When we have our EQs on, it seems like everything is a little bit more defined, right? It's like when you close your eyes, you can kind of see the edges of our sounds instead of it being kind of a blurry blob. So that is how we deal with masking, guys. Avoid it in the first place. Panning, sidechain compression, and EQ. I really hope you found this video useful and that it makes EQ and masking seem less intimidating, because I know for years when I was first getting started, I was very overwhelmed when I would have two sounds in similar frequency range, because I'd be like, what the fuck do I do with these? Oh no. I hope you don't feel that after watching this video. I hope that you feel confident to tackle any sounds that are getting pesky with each other. And if you are new to mixing, I just want to remind you to keep with it. It is something that gets easier and easier every single time you do it. So keep it up, keep having fun, and just don't take it too seriously. Good enough is good enough. All right, that's a wrap. I'll see you guys next time. Bye. How do I do this with my